Episode 351, Jane Parnell talks about healing through mountain climbing and her new book, Off Trail.
A very large 1.5-ton boulder tipped over and caught my leg. And it crushed between my knee and my ankle, my right leg, my calf, between it and the boulder underneath. And I couldn't move a muscle. I have never experienced that kind of pain before because my leg was being crushed.
You're listening to the Adventure Sports Podcast, brought to you by 180 Tech. We talk with adventurers from around the globe to bring you the inspiration and motivation you need to get started in the outdoors or to keep you moving if you're already there. Now here's your host, Kurt Linville.
This episode is brought to you in part by Bissell Bark Bath, the easier way to bathe your dog indoors. For more information, go to Bissell/AdventureSports and be sure to use the coupon code AdventureSports when you get a bark bath for your dog. Hi friends, today the show is about mountaineering, but not just mountaineering. It's about using the mountains to grow, to heal for a lifetime. Today's guest is Jane Parnell, and Jane has climbed nearly all 300 of the highest peaks in Colorado. That means she did the 14ers, she did the Centennials, she did the top 200s, and has almost finished the 300s. And she did it for reasons that really tell an amazing story. I'm excited to have Jane with us today, and you can hear the whole story because she wrote a book about it. The book is called Off Trail, Finding My Way Home in the Colorado Rockies. Jane, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you.
You bet. So, Jane, you have an amazing story to tell, and I think we're kindred spirits. You and I both love the Colorado Rockies so much. And so I'm really looking forward to our visit today, just because this is one of my favorite topics. So all of you who are mountaineers out there, listen up. And if you're not mountaineers, but you're curious about what it's like, listen up. And if you have no intention of ever getting on a mountain, there's still a lot of human story here that I think you will find inspirational and valuable for your own life. So, Jane, let's start with a little bit of the background. You were 21 years old when a tragedy struck your life. And part of the end result of that was that you turned to the mountains for healing. Will you share with us what that's about?
Yes, shortly after graduating from college, this would have been in the early 1970s, a soldier at Fort Carson near Colorado Springs, he was a Vietnam vet. I didn't know him, but he broke into my cottage in the middle of the night and raped me at knife point.
Oh, no.
And in those days, law enforcement rarely believed women who were raped. You had to be shot or knifed or, to prove that something had happened to you, that you had fought. And so my experience was quite typical. I was not believed. They would not take it seriously. So it was a very traumatic experience because I knew this man was going to go on and rape other women, and he did. And I had an equally bad experience at the hospital where the doctor allowed a bunch of orderlies in the room where I was examined, and they cracked jokes about it. And it was just, the whole thing was very traumatic. So between that experience and my only sibling, my older sister, Alice, being diagnosed at 19 with schizophrenia, I definitely had some challenges, some really big emotional challenges getting over those things. So when I met the man who became my husband for 15 years, Carl, he was a mountaineer. And part of my interest in him was the fact that he was a mountaineer. He introduced me to the idea of climbing Colorado's 54 14ers. And he was very accomplished and a good person to learn from. And I soon discovered, despite my inexperience and a lot of pain in the early years of my hiking, that the mountains were a source of solace and transformation.
Wow. And so this was in the 70s when this started up.
Yeah. I think I maybe maybe 1975, in that ballpark, 76 when I started mountaineering with Carl, and also the Colorado Mountain Club. We both joined the Colorado Mountain Club.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear about the tragedy that struck your life, and it's not uncommon. People have tragedies in life, and I think it's more common than not that we all have things to work through. What I'm really curious about is how mountaineering, climbing Colorado's high peaks, how that provided the healing and instruction you were looking for.
Well, it certainly wasn't the only thing that helped me heal, but it was a big part of it. And the part of it that it played was it enabled me to regain faith in my body. It's very common for rape victims to feel like their body has betrayed them. And so a lot of victims feel very conflicted about their bodies after something like that. And that was true for me. And mountaineering, it was, you have to be physically strong. I wasn't, obviously, in the beginning, but as time went on, I became more and more competent. And that really restored my faith in my body so that I could enjoy it again and appreciate it again. That was one part of it. Another part of it was just the beauty of being in the outdoors, what it's like to hike through all these different ecosystems, make it to the summit, and look out over millions of years of the history of the earth right at your feet in every direction. And it enlarged my perspective so that I could see that my experience was, one little tiny piece of human history, and that I was part of a continuum. And that put everything in perspective for me.
Yeah, I can see that, definitely. It's when you stand on one of those high peaks and you're looking at a view like you were describing, the grandeur of it. I sometimes think it's just the right scale. Because when we look up at the stars, we're seeing something far, far, far bigger, but we don't really connect with that. But when you climb a mountain, then you've been a part of the experience. You feel the size of the mountain. You know the effort required. The wind is in your face, the weather, the sun, whatever's going on. You really experience it. And then when you stand on that peak, you see that vast view across these amazing mountains. It's humbling, but I think it also helps us to understand our place in the bigger order of things.
I couldn't agree more.
Mountaineering is so healing. And what's also interesting about it, I think, and maybe you'll agree with this too, is that it takes a lot of time to climb a peak. And that's time when you're not distracted by everyday life. That's time when you're walking through beauty and you're working with your body. And so that gives you time to think, time to consider, time to slow down on the inside. I think that's also very important.
Yeah, it can be almost a Zen-like experience. I write about that in the book. That quality of the experience, and it really, at least for me, engages me in the present, right here, right now. What's underneath my feet? What's right in front of me?
That's neat. So for people that have never climbed a mountain, will you describe for us what it's like, kind of from start to finish, to just climb kind of an average big peak?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I'm in my late 60s now, and I had my knee replaced in May, so I don't hike. I won't be able to hike as I did before, but I guess I would divide it into phases. My first 3 summers, it was very arduous, very difficult. I was in pain a lot of the time. But what kept me going was the reward on the summit. And even if you don't make the summit, I mean, the animals that you're seeing, the plants, being out in nature and realizing that how interdependent we are. And so that kind of compensates for the difficulty of it, the physical difficulty and discomfort of it. But once that hurdle is crossed, then then it can be quite pleasurable, the physical sensations, because your body is up to it. Your body, you've got the muscles for it. You've got the lung power for it. And then I recall a stage in my 40s and early 50s when I could just fly up a mountain without even thinking about it hardly. And those days are long over. So, but now it's very much a spiritual experience for me. And, I can't do the distances, the elevation gains or mileage that I used to, or anything very technical. But it's still an incredibly worthwhile experience.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's just delightful. So I'm not going to ask you what your favorite peak is, because that's too hard to figure out. But could you tell us what one of your favorites might be, or maybe a couple of your favorite peaks in Colorado?
Oh, there's so many. I tend to approach each mountain on its own terms. What does it have to teach me? What does it have to offer me? And it seems like, I think more in terms of mountain ranges than individual peaks. They all have such distinctive histories geologically and personalities, and I value each of them for different reasons. I think the views, there's several peaks south of Silverton that you can hike out to, and you're overlooking the Grenadiers, which is one of the most rugged sections of one of the most rugged mountain ranges in Colorado. And the views from there are just unbelievable. And you don't see any towns, you don't see any highways. Whereas in the Front Range, on the eastern slope, you're much more likely to see signs of human civilization.
So you're talking about the mountains that are inside of the Weminuche Wilderness area then?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They would be between Silverton and Durango. Yeah.
Wow. What a beautiful part of the state that is. So we're talking about the San Juans, right? But
mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, the biggest mountain range in Colorado.
Nice. I find that every mountain has its own story to tell, and if I take the time to remember a climb, it's just like anybody that you meet. Every person is unique. Each person is an individual, and I find that each mountain is unique and has its own personality, and even each day on each mountain can be unique because you have a different experience. And I'm like you. It would be terribly difficult for me to tell someone what one of my favorite mountains might be,
Yeah.
It might be easier, though, to tell us just an amazing story about an experience you had climbing.
Well, let me think a minute about that. I think no matter what peak it is, I'm always very aware of the history that I'm looking at, and in my tiny little place in time and space. There was a peak that I really enjoyed. I mean, most of the peaks I climbed in recent years before my knee surgery are unnamed, low 13ers that hardly ever get climbed, maybe once or twice a year, if that. And I love those peaks because I don't see other people, and it gives me a different perspective on the mountains, on the Colorado Rockies, because I'm at a lower altitude. On the 14ers, you're looking down on everything, you're above everything. On some of the lower 13ers, you're positioned lower down, so you don't get the expanse of a view, but you do get wonderful perspectives on mountains that you've climbed before, and you're seeing them from different positions. And I always appreciate that because I realize every mountain can be looked at in such different ways.
Yeah, that's true.
And I never really get to know a mountain. Climbing it once, it's one thing to climb it once, another thing to climb every peak around it and look at it from every conceivable angle.
Yeah, that's funny. That happened to me just this winter. I climbed Boulder Mountain, which is 13.5 behind Antero, just west of Antero. So you would know where that is. I'm sure you've climbed it.
Yeah. I'm sure I have.
I got to the top of that peak, And I looked to the south, and I saw a peak, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what it was. And I was surprised because it was Tabaguach, which I had climbed previously, but from the viewpoint of Boulder Mountain, it looked completely different. So it's just kind of an example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's almost unrecognizable, and then you're getting to know it in a different way. And that's another thing that I think is very interesting about doing the lower 13ers, because I actually probably have done at least 400 of the 13ers, maybe 450, I don't know. And I won't finish them now, not with my arthritis and so on, but it doesn't matter. But the other interesting thing about doing the 13ers is, well, in any mountain, I'm looking around and I'm going, have I climbed that one? Have I climbed that one? And then I want to know, oh, I haven't climbed that mountain yet. I'd like to do that someday. So it's a way to discover more country.
Oh, it is. And I have this experience, I'm sure you do too, that I get to the top of a peak and I start looking around at all the other peaks, and it just turns into, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to do that. And it's amazing when you get up there. I mean, you've climbed so many more mountains than I have, but when you get up there, it's just all the other peaks begin to call to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost trivial to someone who's never climbed what we're talking about. They're thinking, what? I don't get it. But once you've been there and you've tasted of what mountaineering is about, and then you get that kind of an excitement about it, and when you see those peaks, there's something big there. So for the mountaineers, they know exactly what we're talking about, and they're saying, yeah, I get it. And that's part of the value of the sport, isn't it? It's just so vast.
It's endless. And of course, if you don't confine yourself to Colorado, you could spend 100 lifetimes doing it. And I did get out of Colorado. I mean, I have, climbed elsewhere and also out of the country. Not as often as I wished, but I did get to do it. But it's just endless. And then every valley you look into, there's lakes, there's more valleys, and it's not just the mountains, it's all the other things around them.
Oh, yeah, such natural beauty. Yeah, that's it. You're absolutely right. Those are just a few of the rewards of mountaineering. You already mentioned another one inadvertently, and that was that when you started, it was really, really tough, but over time, you got very strong, and they became easier.
I got very strong. Yeah, and I ended up doing 30 or 40 solos. I wouldn't do that now, especially after that close call I had in 2007, but that's how confident I felt and how strong I was.
Well, tell us about what happened in 2007.
Well, I was climbing an unnamed peak. I love unnamed peaks because they don't have as strong an imprint from humans. They haven't even been named, and there's something very magical about that to me. But it was an unnamed peak near Vaderhorn, which is a 14er in the Wymanooch. And it gets climbed maybe once or twice a summer, and I was with two friends. And there was just one challenging part towards the end as you make the summit ridge, and that went well. We made the summit, we were coming back, and then we got down out off the chimney, very rotten, loose rock with a lot of exposure, so had to pick our way carefully. And once I was off of that, I was crossing a boulder field that was fairly level, and it looked pretty innocuous. I've hiked across dozens and dozens and dozens of boulder fields and never had a problem. But the group had gotten spread apart. My friend, one friend, a woman's friend of mine from Salt Lake, was way ahead, and the other friend from Colorado was way behind. And so no one could see me at that point. And a very large 1.5-ton boulder tipped over and caught my leg. And it crushed between my knee and my ankle, my right leg, my calf, between it and the boulder underneath. And I couldn't move a muscle. I had never experienced that kind of pain before because my leg was being crushed. Oh. And so I was screaming at the top of my lungs for help. And they finally heard me and came. The woman was very small and lightweight. She couldn't really do anything except comfort me. The man happened to be a wrestler in college years ago, because even the two of them pushing when I wasn't just collapsing on my back in exhaustion and pain. Couldn't move it one iota.
Wow.
And so he squatted as if he were in a wrestling match, and it was an opponent. And somehow he managed to leverage it with his chest and his arms out of that position so that he could just shift it slightly so that they were able to drag my leg out from underneath the boulder. And to my amazement, when I rolled up my pant leg, there was no bone sticking out. I thought for sure I had a compound fracture.
Right.
But I didn't. I mean, the leg was extremely swollen and bloody and cut, and, just, it really looked like a mutation of my original calf. And to my surprise and delight, I felt no pain at that moment. From then on, I couldn't feel anything in that leg. And so they got me up on my leg down to a snow field about 100 feet below, and we packed my leg in a jacket full of snow because the swelling was just getting worse and worse. It looked like my leg was going to rupture. And we had about 3.5 miles and, 2,500, 2,800 feet to go. It took a long time, and I used their shoulders as crutches, but we got to the car just as the sun was going down, and then we drove into Lake City, and just as we arrived at the clinic, they were just about to close it.
Oh.
So I was very lucky. We got off the mountain before dark, and we got to the clinic just as they were closing it. And, there really wasn't much they could do for me, but they just suggested that I go see an orthopedist in Gunnison the next morning. So that night I had a long night with my leg up on a sleeping bag, keeping it elevated and trying to ice it. But when you're camping, very difficult to tend to an injury like that. But I did have a crush injury, and I might have had a hairline fracture. They didn't do an MRI, but it was about 2 months of recovery from that, being on a walker for weeks and then a cane and so on. And I still, to this day, have a large dent in my calf where the calf is, there's a hole in the calf where that muscle and all the other soft tissues around it will never come back.
Wow. So I have to ask, first of all, what a scary experience. And that's part of the risk that we take when we go into the backcountry. You don't have to be mountain climbing for that either. But I have to ask, as you look back on it, was it worth that injury for the experiences that you've had?
Oh, I would say so. If I ended up like that fellow, I forget his name, and who was canyoneering in Utah and had to cut his arm off. If I ended up like that, I probably would have some regrets. But it didn't really. I started climbing within 2 months of that accident, just little peaks, and I've had chronic tendonitis in that leg and other problems as a result. But it could have been so much worse that it really didn't. I never really second-guessed anything.
Yeah. Special thanks to our sponsor, Bissell Bark Bath. Bathing your dog is messy, and it trashes your house. Groomers are expensive, and in the wintertime especially, you can't clean a dog outside. It's just too cold. Well, the Bissell Bark Bath has solved all these problems. You have a spray nozzle that sprays a solution under the fur on the skin, and then you have a suction that lifts that dirty, wet solution out of your dog's fur. You can clean your dog anywhere in the house without making a mess. It only uses 48 ounces of water. It's a great, convenient way to give your dog a nice cleaning indoors. For more information or to buy your bark bath, go to bissell.com/adventure sports. That is BISSELL.com/adventure sports. Use Adventure Sports for the coupon code, and they will send you 2 free no-rinse shampoo bottles as well. Just to estimate, how many times do you think that maybe you had a close call where there was no injury, but something happened that you somehow just escaped?
Well, I can think of 2 times. One was on Dallas Peak, which was, for me, the scariest of the 100 highest. it hadn't been climbed very often, and so we were kind of trying to figure out the route as we went. This was our second attempt. And on the way down, I think I was just exhausted probably, or dehydrated or something, because I turned upside down on the rappel. And I'm looking down 2,500 feet at Blue Lakes and going, oh, God, what am I going to do now? And then I was still married at the time to Carl, and I was yelling up at him, and he was kind of instructing me how to get out of that situation. And I finally uprighted myself. And then I got down that chimney and then across the ledge. And as I was untying, I was untying, and I was untying from the rope, and the fellow who was climbing with us, he did a lot of peaks with us in those years, and he was standing on the other side of this tiny, maybe a couple feet worth of snow, and I stepped on the snow, and it gave way, and my foot went all the way through, and I realized that I was about to be launched into 2,500 feet of space.
Wow!
And he grabbed me. So if he hadn't been there, that would have been probably the end.
Mm.
So I was very, very grateful to him. And another time, I was hiking with two friends, again in the San Juans. I don't know what is it about the San Juans. Well, the rock for one thing. Very, very hot day, in the mid-80s, which is very hot for those altitudes.
Right.
And I was hiking with two people, and my dog took off. And I could not find my dog, and so I decided to turn back. And I took a shortcut where I thought the dog had gone, and I ended up sliding on some gravel down a steep slope into the creek. And it was, 50, 60 feet. I didn't break anything, but I was just cut and bruised head to toe. Broke my glasses. And they went down the creek, and so I had no eyeglasses. And I managed to get out of there, and I get back to the car, and of course the dog is asleep underneath the car. And the dog had decided, because it was so hot and there was no water anywhere along this hike, we weren't crossing any creeks, he just said, the heck with this, and he went back to the car. So my panic about the dog was not justified, but I had no way of knowing that.
Right.
So I drove into Lake City, good old Lake City, and there happened to be a doctor on call that afternoon, and he just kind of looked me over, and, no x-rays or anything, and he said, well, when you get back to Colorado Springs, where I was living at the time, you might want to check in with your doctor, just make sure, nothing's going on. And when I saw that doctor, I was just covered with bruises. And we both agreed that I was very lucky.
Wow. You've told three really harrowing stories in a row, but we have to remind people that you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days mountaineering, thousands of hours, and you've had a few things happen. And that can happen in the shower. That can happen driving to work. That can happen. Those sorts of things happen in life. And you've had a lifetime of mountaineering, so really you've done very, very well.
Well, especially considering when I compare myself to a few people I've known who died in accidents, that's a minority, but still, that can happen. And I would have to say, generally speaking, I hiked with people who really knew what they were doing and who were well-trained and didn't do stupid things. And when I was alone, I was very careful, very conservative. But I wouldn't do that now, and I certainly wouldn't recommend soloing unless you had a lot of experience and, were certain to tell people where you were, and, so if anything went wrong, people would come looking for you.
Sure. I think it's so amazing how when you get into nature and you test yourself and you learn a skill set, so that you can solo relatively safely, because you understand how to take care of yourself in the woods and on the peaks. It builds a confidence.
Yeah, but you don't want to take it for granted either, because, the friends I've known, the acquaintances I've known, sometimes I think, you get to a skills level where you just make assumptions.
Right.
That you can handle almost anything, and then, But, sometimes, I mean, if a boulder peels off a mountain and crushes you, there's not a whole lot you can do about that, except be aware of what time of day you're going up.
Yeah.
In Colorado Rockies, really early morning starts are very important. In July and August because of the lightning storms, and in June and May because when the rock loosens up, when there's snow and it's melting and everything loosens up, as it warms up, and then that's when you get rock fall. Boy, have I seen some doozies.
I can imagine. We're dealing with forces that are so much bigger than humans, so vast, and it's amazing we learn how to work inside of that environment. And but that's part of the appeal. It's part of the experience. When you see those amazing rock slides or avalanches, or see other things that, if you spend enough time in the wilderness, you'll see things that are so rare that people won't even believe it if you tell them.
Right. And you can see the evidence, of course, of avalanche debris from the previous winter that goes clear across a valley and up the other side.
Yeah.
And that's quite an education in the power of avalanches. I mean, I've seen them in the wintertime as they actually happen, but it's almost even more sobering to see the debris months later and all the broken trees, part way up the other side of the valley.
Yeah, it's amazing. Some of those avalanches are so huge, so huge. Well, Jane, I did not ask you this before we started recording, but do you have an excerpt or two from the book that you would like to read?
Yeah. This is from the chapter called Sojourners. And in this chapter, I introduce Isabella Bird, who climbed Long's Peak in 1873 with a fur trapper by the name of Rocky Mountain Jim. And during this chapter, I introduce my climb early in my mountaineering career with Carl. And I'm very much a novice, and we're climbing Long's Peak. And just before this passage, Isabella Bird has made the summit, and she's looking out at what was truly wilderness. We don't have that experience today. And so I'm comparing her response and what she saw to what I experienced. And I'm looking to the east, Long's Peak is in the front range, and to the east, you're looking out at, just a sea of a prairie and sagebrush steppe, that in those days, in those years, the pollution wasn't nearly as bad as it is now, and you could actually see, on a clear day, you could actually see the border of Kansas, believe it or not.
Wow.
So here I am describing that. And then my the history major in me, that was my undergraduate degree, comes into play a little later in the passage. To the east, beyond the forested foothills and treeless plateaus of the Front Range, the Euclidean grid of industrialized agriculture and suburbia checkers the grasslands, tan and pewter. Along the horizon, cultivated prairie merges with sky, the possible border with Kansas vaguely discernible in a dreamlike sheen of dust. Through the shimmering haze, the past declares itself in waves. I hear the creation story of a mountain range as glaciers grind warped earth into valleys. I hear the report of spent rifles and thunder of stampeding ghost buffalo as soldiers follow in the wake of fur trappers and surveyors. I hear the forbidden chants of captive nomads, death marched onto reservations. I see the saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths and Isabella's wolves before they were hunted to extinction. Coronado, greed-stricken and delusional, driving his men to madness. Covered wagons bearing my maternal ancestors from Virginia to Ohio to Kansas, that faint blur on the horizon, and miners dynamiting for fool's gold that glitters in their hands, and dispatches them in an unjust age to cemeteries now covered in weeds and fallen tombstones. The horrors of Cripple Creek and Silverton and Central City, who died young and heartbroken, embraced in the afterlife, by the high society that spurned them. So what's coming into play there is just, my imagination and my curiosity about the past.
I love the history that you pull into that. That's so amazing to kind of pull all of those things together into one line of thought, looking over the ages and talking about the events that we find interesting.
Yeah, and that all goes back to what we were both saying about our place in time and space and the continuum.
Oh yeah.
Of the earth and of history,
It's official. Winter has arrived, and Bentgate Mountaineering is prepared to help you get ready for your epic winter. Come check out the latest in alpine touring, telemark, NTN, and splitboarding gear. They have brands like Black Crows, DPS, Dynafit, G3, Icelantic, K2, Technica Blizzard, Arc'teryx, Mammoth, Solomon, Volley, Neversummer, Jones, and BCA. And you do need to be safe out there. Bentgate has the latest in avalanche safety gear. They have beacons, airbags, shovels, and probes, and they're ready to help you educate yourself on snow safety. They also rent out gear, so you can get your skis and your boots there, as well as your avalanche safety equipment. What's more, they also have free demo ski days at local resorts, so you can try out the latest gear. Now, how much fun does that sound? So swing by Bentgate in Golden, Colorado, or go to bentgate.com to find your new gear, as well as to get updates on all of their events.
We might be smack dab in the middle of winter these days, but spring is really just right around the corner. Make sure you've got one of our lightweight camp stoves ready to go in your pack for when the weather starts turning warmer. Both the 180 stove and the 180 flame are designed to burn the abundant wood fuels you find on the ground instead of requiring you to haul in heavy, messy camp fuels. Take a minute to head on over to our site at www.180tack.com to check out these American-made stoves that are built to last. You'll be helping us, and you'll be helping the Adventure Sports Podcast. Thanks, guys.
How long did it take when you started climbing and working through all of the challenges, the tragedy of the rape and of your sister's diagnosis with schizophrenia? How long did it take as you were climbing to begin to find real healing?
Well, I would say my relationship with my body had shifted by about the fourth summer, because by then I was strong enough, to handle a lot more than I did in the early summers, where I was scared and exhausted and dehydrated a lot of the time.
Right.
And so my relationship with my body, I became more appreciative of my body and what it could do for me, and how fortunate I was to even have a body. The psychological healing took a lot longer, and that required some therapy. And it also, I got into Zen Buddhism and meditation, and that had a powerful effect on me as well, because it enabled me to dwell more securely in the present.
Right.
And the past just kind of falls away, and it's there, but it's not dominating things or taking over in moments of stress.
When I talk to so many wonderful people about the adventure sports that they love, it's very frequent that it comes up how much they appreciate being in the moment doing the sport. And I think sports that require a lot of focus really facilitate that. It might be mountain biking, or it might be technical rock climbing. It can be a lot of different things that require that kind of extreme presence to be successful. And I think that there's something to that, even just on a long hike. It's not as quick moving. It may not require as much concentration, but there's something about the repetitive nature of stepping and stepping and stepping, and the changing landscape around you, that I think it can draw a person into the moment. So I imagine, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but did you experience that even before the Buddhism, just from climbing the peaks?
Right. I mean, that's so true. And in fact, do you have time for me to read one little paragraph where I describe that?
Yeah, we'd love it.
Okay, this is from the first chapter, and it's called Solo. And I'm recently divorced, and I'm describing why I hike. And there's lots of reasons that I give, but I'm just going to give you this one paragraph. I hike for the thrill of it. scaring myself speechless on more than one occasion, but my body is up to it. Legs of granite, heart and lungs, a 200 horsepower engine, driving me upward at 1,800 vertical feet per hour, 65 heartbeats per second, 3,600 per hour. On the trail, my body ceases to be an object of curiosity or despair. It has a weight to it. My footsteps land lightly while my feet feel rooted. Every step, a declaration of intimacy with the rock, the turf, the soil. The tapping of my hiking poles, synchronizing with each inhalation and exhalation. My breath distilled into the clarity of light.
That's beautiful. You have such a beautiful voice in your writing. It's remarkable. And before we hit record, you told me just a little bit about how quickly you found a publisher, which was amazing that you did because it's so hard to find a publisher, but it's not amazing when you hear the writing. It's just so very well done.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Keep in mind that I had been writing for many years. I was a magazine editor 3 times, 3 different magazines, and so I wrote a lot of articles and essays, and I learned a lot from that. But then it was my master's degree in literature and writing late in life, well into my 50s, that enabled me to write this book. I mean, this book came out of my thesis for that master's degree. And it was just very important to me to ground the story in the material world, the physicality of it, and to convey that to readers.
Yeah. So this is published by the University of Oklahoma Press, right?
Yes, yeah, and I didn't quite answer my question. I just realized. Yes, a friend who has published several books with them, when he heard my idea, I described it to him on the phone one time. He said, "You should query them, send them a book proposal, a chapter or 2. And I sent it out to them, and I sent it out to a small independent publisher in Utah. They weren't interested, but Oklahoma emailed back within weeks of receiving my proposal and said, we would like to see the manuscript. Well, I wasn't done, and they didn't know that. So I had to sit down and finish. The second part of the book, hadn't even been written yet, so it motivated me. And so I finished it and I sent it in, and they liked it as is, but then they had outside reviewers, and I made certain that my thesis advisor, a magnificent author who I learned an enormous amount from, I made certain that she would be one of the reviewers, and she had some suggestions. So I did quite a bit of revising, especially of the first part, and I'm so grateful because it was a better book for it. And I'm grateful that the publisher allowed the extra time for that, too.
It's so exciting when you think about it. You're putting your life story on paper, and you're weaving the tale in a way that others can benefit from it. And that's a gift to all of humanity, when you do that. And then to finally see it come to fruition and for it to be there, something you can hold in your hand and other people can read and benefit from. What an enriching experience. Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. And that was one of my motivations, was to capture a time and place that is disappearing, and not just because of the passage of time, but climate change, because our forests and tundra are greatly endangered. And many of the things that I have grown to love about the Colorado Rockies are probably going to go extinct, not in my lifetime necessarily, but eventually. And I wanted to preserve that for future generations, so that even if they themselves couldn't see and hear and smell what I did, they could at least get an idea of what it was like.
Yeah. Well, do you have another excerpt that you would like to read for us? I'm enjoying it so much.
Okay. Yeah. Never ask an author to just shut up, because they won't. Let me see. How about I'll read a little bit about Isabella Bird and why she intrigued me.
Okay.
This would be that that chapter, Sojourners, because I think she's a fascinating character. I am married at this point, and I'm feeling really conflicted and kind of bored about, being a housewife and so on. And so Isabella Bird kind of rescued me from that stage of my life. I have a husband who supports me, a defensible home on a mountainside, a national forest in my backyard. Yet a hazy discontent casts a pall over my days, incurable for lack of a proper diagnosis. Perhaps my maternal ancestry predisposes me to flights of unhappiness. The English are a nomadic breed. The dreary weather and insufferable class hierarchy might have driven them mad otherwise. With little to do during mud season but plot next summer's hiking misadventures, I am a housebound voyeur in need of inspiration, a guidebook perhaps, to the terra incognita of my interior. Isabella Bird's fifth book, A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains, seldom out of print since its publication in 1879, offers a woman's perspective from an earlier time that might illuminate the source of my discontent. The cover illustration for one edition depicts a youthful redhead riding a horse in a peach gown and matching bonnet, a sugary confection bearing no resemblance to the actual Isabella. My first trip to Colorado in the summer of 1954, age 3, I arrived atop the portable toilet in the back of our Ford Woody, pointing at the Brown Palace Hotel and screeching, "Looky, looky," as we tunneled through the tight-fisted streets of downtown Denver. On her first and only trip to Colorado in the fall of 1873, Isabella Bird took the train from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Greeley, marveling, as she noted in her journal, at the mountains that upheave themselves above the prairie seas. Gradually, they are gaining possession of me. I can look at and feel nothing else. And I included that passage because she's possessed just as I was. And she found a fur trap, and when she finally made it to Estes Park, which was just a couple of summer pastures for ranchers on the front range, there's hardly anyone in the area, and he took her up Long's Peak, and she'd been up a number of peaks on horseback, but never on foot, and it just about demolished her. And the parallel that I draw between her life and mine is just, she was an invalid. Whenever she was at home in England, she was in bed most of the time. She had all kinds of ailments. But the minute she went abroad, whether it was Tibet or China or Colorado Rockies or the California Sierras, she had this miraculous recovery because she was had liberated herself from the stifling gender roles of the Victorian era. And I really connected with that. And I was fascinated by how she, worked through her conflicts successfully in some cases and not so in others. And the other thing that intrigued me about her was her attraction to dangerous men. So there's passages in that chapter where I talk about my first reaction to Carl when I first meet him at work, and her first reaction to Rocky Mountain Jim when she comes across him and she's riding on horseback in the wilderness and she comes across his hut. And she also had a painful relationship with her sister, whom she lost at a young age. And so there's just so many parallels between our stories.
You know what's fascinating about that to me is that it seems like it takes something bigger than ourselves, an excitement, to generate that desire for real life, for real living, and that pulls us out of our circumstances. You know what I mean? And as you were reading about her on the train, looking out and watching the mountains growing on the horizon and captivating her, I saw that. And then when you mentioned that she had been an invalid, back in England, and that as she traveled, it pulled her out of that, and she then suddenly had the energy to go on and to conquer, and to experience bigger things. That's what adventure sports are about. That's why we climb mountains, isn't it?
Well, certainly in part, yes, I would agree with that.
Well, it's a beautiful book. I love your writing. We're running a little bit low on time. We've almost used it all up. Do you have a funny or an inspirational or a challenging story that you'd like to share with us about your life experiences in the mountains?
Well, I guess I would just say they are teachers. If we listen and pay attention, they will teach us a lot about ourselves and our place in the world and what matters and what doesn't. And we can take that recognition, those realizations back into our day-to-day life if we so choose, which I did, partly because of my Zen practice, and apply what we've learned and experienced out there to our day-to-day life, so that nothing is mundane anymore, at least to me. Every footstep in life matters and is to be treasured.
Oh, well said. Yeah, well said. So, what's the best way for people to get a copy of your book?
Well, it's published by University of Oklahoma Press. So if you call their 800 number, 800-627-7377, and then press 1 for customer service, you just give them, Jane Parnell, off trail, you want to buy it, and then they'll take your order right on the phone and your address and everything.
So that was 1-800-627-7377. Is that right?
That's right. And then you have to press 1. There's a bunch of different numbers you can press, and it's the first one, 1, which will get you to a customer service. And
your book is just going out this year, correct?
Right. It's been out for a little over a month is all.
How exciting. That's great.
And I am available. I mean, I'm already touring the state and doing readings and, libraries, bookstores, book clubs, and I'm available for that. I do have a Facebook page, Jane Parnell, and then it's at Colorado Rockies, the shorthand version of Colorado. And if you do a Google search, you should be able to find my author's page. And I have the event calendar there and some other things.
Okay. Jane Parnell, Colorado Rockies.
Yeah, there's an @ symbol in there. And I don't know if that'll take you there directly, but if you do it through a Google search, I'm sure you can find it.
Oh, that'd be great. So people can get more information by going there. They can order the book at 800-627-7377, option 1. And I just want to thank you for your time today. I have thoroughly enjoyed visiting with you about your experiences climbing mountains and how it transformed your life. And I really want to read your book. It sounds so delightful. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you very much for calling me, and I enjoyed chatting with you.
Oh, you bet. And for all of our listeners out there, find that transformative experience. Find a way to grow and to thrive and to build that bigger life that we're always talking about on the Adventure Sports Podcast. That's what it's really all about. And until the next show, make sure you do get out there and have some fun.
If you're in Colorado, Jane will be doing a book signing at the Tattered Cover in Denver at 2 p.m. on February 24th. That's this Saturday. Be sure to check out our show notes for a link to that. On the next episode, we'll have Daniel Leroy on. He'll be on to talk about snowboarding and green snowboard manufacturing. We'll also talk a little bit about mountain living and ski bumming. Until then, do us a favor and visit us over on Patreon. And do make sure you get out there and have some fun.